Welcome back to another episode of Cap and Trade. Good to see everybody. I am your host, TexansCap. You can follow me on Twitter at TexansCap if you prefer the written form, capandtrade.substack.com. So we got a ton of news to get to tonight. We will have our guest, MIke Meltser, hop in here in just a quick second. But if you're new to the channel, we cover all things NFL, dabble into some salary cap and contracts and anything in between. So if you got any questions, comments, throw them up on the board. We'll get to as much as we can. Make sure you hit that subscribe and your like button. And let's bring Mike in here. Hey, good evening, sir.
Cap, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm very good, man. Excited. Busy time. A lot going on. Dud of a free agency, but the NFL finds a way to make it a busy thing no matter what.
Yeah, it was not expected to be, it's not a super talented class, but there has obviously been a ton going on this week.
Yeah, I don't even know where to start, but yeah, I mean, we'll start right with Houston. You know, it's as expected. We knew it was going to be, or at least we expected to be quantity again, because they had so many roster spots to fill. I mean, they only had 52 players under contract before they started this process, so they're already up to 10 new players signed, 1 player traded for, 3 or 4 re-signings, got another player visiting tomorrow. Just busy. But just from a high-level view, what's your initial take on what Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans and the Texans are doing so far?
Cap, you may not like this, and I imagine the audience may not love this. I'm going to give Caserio like a C or C+ for what I've seen. And I got reasons for it. Now, there are some moves I like, so we like to begin with the positive. I like signing Case Keenum. Makes a whole lot of sense for what they're going to do at quarterback, likely at number 2. I like the trade of Shaq Mason to fortify the offensive line, put a guard next to Howard. I thought that made sense. Jimmy Ward, I thought was a pretty reasonable signing, pairing with Petrie, and it makes sense. My frustration is he's doing the same thing that he's done in 2021, in 2022, now he's doing in 2023. It is a lot of volume, and I don't know if this is the right way to build a roster considering how weak the roster is relative to the other 31 teams. There was the theory that, what Nick did in 2021 and 2022 was sort of a temporary thing before they got more cap space, they got a new coach who they're actually going to build with, and yet we have seen largely more of the same. So that is my frustration. Now, to cut off like the following questions. Well, who did you expect him to sign? Like, do you expect him to max out the cap? No. Here's my thought. Cap, this is not a great free agency class. I thought it was fairly mediocre. Here's what I wanted. They didn't have to sign 5 guys like the Bears did a huge money. My thought was 1 to 2 to 3 signings that were like 3 to 4 year deals of people who were 26, 27 years of age, who you plug in and you're thinking, okay, this person can be a somewhat critical part of the next playoff team. And I am surprised that Nick Caserio has chosen not to do that. That is why I am not thrilled with what's happened so far. Now, because I think they have the right coach and I think they'll draft the right quarterback, my pessimism is vastly tempered. But that is my disappointment with what's happened over these 3 days.
Well, you say I wouldn't be happy with that. I'm pretty much in agreement with you. I'm not overly concerned with what they're doing as compared to the last 2 years. I feel like it's a slight upgrade in talent than the type of players they have signed the last 2 years. But again, I think this coaching staff potentially could be stronger than the past 2 staffs. So maybe that can bring out the talent a little more. I'm not too concerned about familiarity. I mean, like you said, they're bringing in Jimmy Ward and, Denzel Perryman. If he signs, he's got some background with this scheme. But from an overall perspective, I feel like the talent level is just slightly better. But I thought maybe they might make one splash signing. I just thought, show a little something and that just maybe the Sheldon Rankins is Nick Casario's version of a splash signing, 1 year, $10.5 million. But at least they seem to be, at least they didn't bring like 5 players in from the 49ers or some crap like that. That was one thing I was going to be really worried about. I get that they had a successful team, they had, a successful roster, but I wanted them to do what they're doing, is at least is like find some variety across the league. And, some of the players that they re-signed, which I was excited about, with MJ Stewart, I think he's very good special teams. Tavier Thomas, news just came out on him, which I was way off.
I was good with that.
I'm ecstatic for that deal. 1 year, 2.75 or 2.25 million. I figured he was going to get 4 or 5, maybe almost $6 million a year. That one blew me away. But there's nothing egregious per se with majority of the contracts that they've signed. No, they're all, again, 1 to 2 years. I've run out of reasons to explain why they're only doing 1 and 2 year deals, why there's nothing 3 or 4 or long term or anything like that. We've heard Caserio say 2 year windows. I wish I could get a little more color from the team on why they're doing 1 and 2 year deals. I would like, beyond just saying it's a 2 year window and the roster changes, the league changes, but there's got to be some kind of philosophy, mentality to that type of contract structure being utilized over and over.
Do you think that, this might be a dumb question, but just because Nick Caserio says he looks at the team in 2 year windows, does that necessarily mean that each contract has to be 2 years or less? Because I don't think the answer to that is yes.
I don't think so either. I think you can still look at 2 year windows and still sign players beyond that. But I mean, I've searched high and low. I've listened to every time Caserio speaks, I've listened to him speak, and I just can't find anything publicly stated that aligns with why they continue to do this. I'm not too concerned about it. The fan base seems a little more concerned about the 1 and 2 year deals. I don't know if it's more from a protection standpoint, injury protection standpoint, anything like that. Maybe there's something that I'm missing on the back end that aligns with why they're doing these 1 and 2 year deals. But I don't know. And it is what it is. It seems like that's going to be his MO. And if that, you don't overpay in free agency, you see all these teams spending, like the Chicago Bears. I think what they're doing is for the most part a good thing, but they had a lot of money they had to spend. It wasn't a need to spend. They had to spend it to meet the cash.
They did,
threshold.
yes.
But majority of the time, and I've said it on here numerous times over and over, free agency, you're paying top of the market value for a player that you're not probably, more than likely, are not going to get the return on that investment. And so I don't think it's it doesn't concern me that they're not making any big splashes. Like I said, maybe the Rankins is their big splash guy. They've added a few veterans. Like you said, I think the age thing is a valid point. Like Jimmy Ward's 32, Rankins is 29.
The age thing is a big deal.
Yeah, Robert Woods is 31, 32. And so bringing in a little bit older,
he's been
players
there in the league forever.
Yeah. Yeah. So that part's a little bit of concern, but I think the roster will probably get younger just by fact of another very large draft class coming in. So
I agree with that.
But it's, but real quick, I agree with you though. If I had to put a grade on, it's like a B- C+. It's nothing that majorly concerns me, but nothing just makes me go, wow, that's exactly what we needed.
I just think, because I'm going through NFL.com's free agency tracker, they do a good job of it, kind of breaking it down what every team has done. And my thing is, like, if people are thrilled with what Houston has done under the theory of like, oh, teams overpay in free agency. I mean, not every team in the league has signed players to 3 year deals or more in this offseason. But Cap, I'm looking through these teams, whether it's, I'm just kind of going through divisions. Like, most of these teams have invested at least 1 to 2 deals that are 3 years or more. Do people who are defending Caserio at every turn think that literally every team in the league is wrong when it comes to that? Like, that is my confusion on this. Like, I'm just going through some of these. Like, the 49ers signed Hargrave. That's a 4 year deal. The Seahawks signed Jones, who I wanted. That's a 3 year deal for $51 million.
Well, here, we'll throw them up on the screen.
So
for everybody's about to see this document, this is your peek behind the curtain. This is the document that the Albert Breers, the Aaron Wilson, the James
I'm
Palmer,
intrigued.
all these, when you see them rattling off all these contract numbers, this
Yes.
is the exact same document they're looking at.
Okay.
It's not overly crazy. Let me make it a little bit. Well, no, that's not going to work. But it's literally just a rundown contract.
Just the basics of each deal.
It doesn't have any contract language in it. It'll have some notes about up to, let's see if we can find one here, right here, Andrew Beck, up to 250,000 in playing time incentives, but doesn't have the breakdown and the details. I have to wait till I see the actual contract itself to break it down. But when you start scanning through these, so this is the unrestricted free agent one. There's one for street free agents and extensions, but you start going through these. I mean, Ben Powers was a 4-year deal, but 3-year for TJ, 3 for Jimmy, 3 for Tuttle, 1, 3, 2, 3, 1. There's a 4 for Tremaine Edwards. That was a big deal, and they front loaded the crap out of that one.
That was a big deal. Yes.
There's 2 4-year deals, but you start going through these, everything is 2 3-year deals. So the majority of the league is doing that.
Here's a bit of a random question.
Big guy. Yeah.
What teams in the NFL, this might put you on the spot, but I don't think too much. What teams in the league do you think have the most analogous overall situation to Houston's? Like, just off the top of your head, if you're like, what team do you think is in kind of like a generally similar situation to the Texans? Because I want to do a kind of an experiment here. Like, would you say maybe Carolina would fit in that category?
Yeah, it's got to be a team that doesn't have a quarterback.
Yeah.
New coaching staff.
Could we argue Indianapolis and Carolina are both pretty similar?
Yeah, I think
to Houston.
I think Indy's roster was maybe in Carolina.
It's better.
So they're both in a better place than Houston's are, but
agreed.
From a high level view, yeah, they're pretty similar.
So let's look at some of these teams. So Indianapolis, they have not signed a whole bunch of guys, but they signed Ebukam, who I think the Texans are probably in on, to a 3-year deal for $27 million. Yeah, so that's one. Now we look at. Let me go down to the NFC South here.
Yeah, so he signed $8 million per year. 10.75 guaranteed on a 3-year deal. So yeah, I mean, it seemed like Houston was big on a few different players, Ebukam and the linebacker as well that they missed out on. I think also went to Tennessee, but
yes,
Shire. maybe their valuations are just a little bit lower than what the market commanded.
Well, let's look at Carolina. Multi-year deals handed out. Hayden Hurst, tight end. Bradley Bozeman on a re-sign. Shai Tuttle, who's a defensive lineman. They signed Von Bell. I don't know how many years that is. Miles Sanders, they just signed tonight. I'm guessing, some
4-year
money.
It's a 4-year deal.
Yeah. So again, I understand teams can build in different ways and there are different philosophies, but to some extent, like the NFL is a zero-sum game in that there's almost always a winner and a loser at every game. So we can't say, and I get the teams have their own situations, but if Carolina is doing this and the Texans are doing that, somebody's going to end up being wrong on these deals. Someone's going to be right. Someone's got to be wrong on this stuff. And most teams, from what I've seen, Cap, they're handing out at least 1 to 2 3-year contracts so far in the first 3 days. That is why I'm puzzled by Casario's strategy. Let me also add this other point. It was let me find it here. Somebody made a point. Oh, Travis, you don't build through free agency, and we don't really have a good core of young players to build around just yet. Here is my question to that, and tell me what you think, Cap. If you believe, hey, free agency is a bad way to build a football team, which I think we all kind of agree to an extent, but if you believe that, then why should you be thrilled by signing Sheldon Rankins to a 1-year deal for $10 million? I'm not saying it's a bad signing. I think Rankins is a useful player, premium position, critical for DeMeco Ryans' defense. But if your theory is hey, we can't build the roster through free agency, then why should you simultaneously be thrilled by giving a guy for a year at a big cap number? Because that salary is going to be the number. That's going to be the cap hit. And if he leaves in a year, and the way Casario does it, I feel like it's almost impossible to get compensatory picks. Plus, I don't know that Rankins is going to sign some huge deal next year, given his history. That's my question. If you feel like this team it's too early to spend a lot of money, then why should you be thrown by Sheldon Rankins? It doesn't really make a whole lot of logical sense. And I'm not even saying it's a bad move.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we know why the quantity was there the first 2 years, because they just didn't have draft picks carrying over from the previous regime, then the no draft picks in 2021, finally started getting some picks in 2020, 2022. And then, as we all know, there's 11 more on the books this year. And that's what drives that quantity. But at some point, you've got to hit. Once you hit on a few of these players, you need to try to retain them, I guess. I mean,
Yes.
like Okoronkwo, you hit on him, and he ended up going on for more money. And I'm fine with letting him walk. But I think it's not specific to him. I'm just saying in general, if you're going to keep doing this, signing a batch of 20 free agents, you've got to land on a couple of them to where they become foundation mainstays in your roster. But if you keep signing 29, 31, 32-year-old players, your percentage of finding that piece is very, very low. It's already low to begin with for free agency, but it's even more low in that place. So that's back to your point in the beginning, where you say you were hoping to at least see some younger players, whether it's a big splash or not, but find somebody who's a little bit younger that may give you that opportunity to re-sign them for an extended period of time.
Well, this is I was on the air on ESPN 97.5 today with Jake Asman and Brad Kellner. Yep. And the point that I made to them was I used the phrase excess roster value, which I think I made up or maybe stole from somebody. but the concept was like, if you're in a situation like Houston is in, where you're not contending for the playoffs, but you're trying to build up the roster, then I think what you want to do is find some way to invest in players who create more value for you moving forward. Like one simple example would be Joe Shane takes over in New York. He trades Kadarius Toney, who's a disappointment as a number 1 pick, to Kansas City to land a pick that they then turn into Darren Waller. That to me is what we call good resource management. And so I compare and contrast. You mentioned Okoronkwo. Jerry Hughes was a nice find for them. Steven Nelson, Desmond King. But here's the problem that I have. So I'm looking at this. I watch every game, right? We all watch every game. So Desmond King's been a fine signing. So is Steven Nelson. So is Jerry Hughes. But what are we getting out of this? Like, they've played well on defense for a team that won 3 games this past year. And I believe 4 games, in 2021. So you make these signings. King was here 2 years. The other guy's there for a year. So, like, you get good seasons in years where your team is nowhere close to the postseason. So, like, what does that ultimately turn into? Now, you can tell me, hey, that is proof that Nick Caserio is a solid or good talent evaluator, and that may very well indeed be the case. But what I'd like to have happen or prefer to have happen is you sign Jerry Hughes. He has a nice start. You trade him, if possible, for like a 5th-round pick. I don't know if that's realistic or not, by the trade deadline. Therefore, you take a nice signing and a nice evaluation, and you turn it into something that could be a 4-year positive for you moving forward. That is my frustration with some of the names I mentioned, plus the Okoronkwo thing.
Yeah, I think when Caserio first came in, I was expecting kind of a big reset. And there was a reset on the salary cap, but I never felt like there was that big, massive reset on the roster. It just felt like a continuation of something with no direction the last 2 years. There's a little bit of a direction this year, but it feels like the same thing, like you said in the beginning. It just feels like I don't know where this team is trying to go. And I'm hoping with the draft, having another set of draft picks next year. Hopefully the team finds a quarterback in the draft this year. And that putting all those pieces together will finally define that direction. But today I still don't know what it is. And then you still get all these rumors about not even sure if Houston's going to take a quarterback or not. And if that were to happen,
where is that coming from?
I would be thoroughly confused on the direction. So
yes.
So
let me give you another example.
Go ahead.
This is actually a re-signing.
Yeah,
Scott Quesenberry, right? So Scott Quesenberry, when he came in for Justin Britt, did not play very well. They re-signed Scott Quesenberry, which, Rivers McCown made the point, which I kind of agree with that. Like, if a guy plays that poorly, like I don't even know if it's a good idea for both sides to have a re-signing there. But then like I'm looking at the cap table and Scott Questenberry's, I know this is not like an overwhelming amount, but like the cap number on Questenberry this year is $3 million. So like it's something. I don't think that guy is good at football. And I'm presuming they draft a quarterback at number 2 overall. They need a center. So why is the cap hit $3 million for somebody who I think you would actively not want to be your starting center? These are the things that are puzzling.
Yeah,
to me.
that one I didn't quite agree with. But and the unfortunate part with his cap number, the base value is like 2.1 million or something like that, and there's like 900 million in incentives. But because it's all playtime incentives, and because he played almost every single game last year, all those incentives are likely to be earned. So they're all hitting on the cap this year. So if he doesn't play much this year, which we hope would be the expectation, that he's just depth, they'll end up getting a credit on that 900,000 and next year. So, it comes on the book one way or another, but it's just, that's probably the one re-signing that I disagree with. And I get it.
How about Eric Murray?
Yeah. I want to wait and see.
We can't get rid of this guy.
I thought, and I've heard it over and over that they want to get rid of the Bill O'Brien contract stink, and you're going to revise and restructure Eric Murray again. So I'm going to wait and hold my opinion on that until I see that contract. I probably won't. He signed it today, so I probably won't see it until Friday or Saturday. But at least we didn't have that massive re-signing group like we did last year. It felt like just a holdover. So far only 4 re-signings. Two of them are questionable. The other 2 I think are worthy signs with 3 of them counting weeks. Tavierre Thomas and MJ Stewart. So we'll see. And then I'm trying to remember what I was gonna say and I forgot, and I've lost my thought.
Thank goodness they are cutting AJ Cann and Mario Addison.
I was about to get to that. So they got Jalen Reeves-Maybin, who's supposed to be released. They had to wait, and AJ Cann, they had to wait till today, which sounds like maybe they're going to do it tomorrow. And then Mario Addison, I agree with that one. And it sounds like, I don't know, maybe Kirksey's going to be
another one,
a question mark. If they end up signing Perriman or another linebacker, my expectation would be that Kirksey would probably be released at that point. But it's just they've missed out on so many linebackers so far.
Well, that's the thing. Like they still, and they're culling some of them. But I'll text with friends of mine, and I'll just like look at this roster and be like, and I'll look not like the depth chart, but I'll look at the cap numbers, like on over the cap, and I'll constantly have this feeling of like, why does this guy exist? Why does that guy exist? And there are a few left. Eric Murray being one of them. Kirksey being like, I'm looking at this Kirksey thing, and it's like, his cap hit this year is $6.25 million. He's not good. Like, what? Why does he exist on this roster? What are we doing here? Like, this is opportunity cost that is being lost by that number.
Yeah, let's see here.
Someone's saying Orlando Brown just signed a big deal.
Yeah, I know. I see that. I was gonna do my little
Bengals.
Wow,
I like that.
They normally don't spend money, and they spent a little money. They spent a little money last offseason, which was rare for Mike Brown and the Bengals. So 4 years, $64 million, 31 largest signing bonus. Yeah, that's how Cincinnati does things. They don't even guarantee the first year salary. They just do gigantic signing bonus with a roster bonus a year too. 31 million signing bonus, so 64 4 years, so 15, 16 million. Man, that's probably about right for him. And that was, that's a good segue because I wanted to get your take on this, Mike. So
yes,
speaking of Kansas City and Orlando Brown, or leaving Kansas City, they signed Jawan Taylor to the big $80 million, $20 million per year contract in KC to backfill that left tackle spot. He played right tackle his NFL career so far, and they feel confident that he can move over to left tackle. And there was rumors floating around that KC was interested in Laramie Tunsil via trade, which would obviously come with a new contract. I'm trying to get in my head, and Jawan Taylor had a good year this past year, but it was kind of it was it's his first good solid year performance. And you compare that up to Tunsil, who's nearly been all pro, multiple times in his career. How do you justify not wanting to sign Tunsil at $25 million a year, but you're fine with signing Juwan Taylor at $20 million a year? And I've just been fascinated with that evaluation between those two players. I get the draft capital that it would have to come with it. Let's just say, for the sake of this argument, that it would be the 31st pick, the last pick in the draft, maybe that they would give up for Tunsil. I would much rather have a future 2024, a future one, speaking on variance, because it's just more than likely going to be higher. But it just blows me away that, like, if you really were serious, $5 million a year was enough for you to say, nah, we'll just go back to this guy.
Well, I probably would have done the same thing if I were them, and it fits what they did last offseason because they redistributed the resources allocated to Tyreek Hill into all the picks that they got, and they ended up winning the Super Bowl.
And they nailed on 2 of those offensive line picks. My goodness.
Absolutely. So I think for them, I think first round picks. I mentioned this on my show on Sirius XM last week. To me, first round picks are like gold. They're to me the backstop of any NFL team, because when you don't have them and you have a bad season, it completely cripples you. And they're always the backstop to, if everything goes to hell, at least we get the draft capital that is commensurate with how bad our record was. In this case, it's 31, so it's locked in. If I were them, I probably would have thought, okay, Taylor's somebody who's been hyped at the University of Florida, kind of up and down career, but he finished on a high note in Jacksonville. You can plug him in at either spot. They had experience with Orlando Brown himself, a guy who played at right tackle mostly in Baltimore, going to left tackle. If I don't have to give up the first round pick, then that's worth the cap savings. I think for what Brett Veach and Andy Reid have done in Kansas City, I think that calculation actually makes a lot of sense, because those to me, the first round picks are like gold. So that's why if I were them, even though I think Tunsil's a much better player than Taylor, what they did made sense.
That's fair. And that, they have established interior line, Joe Tooney, who's a left guard. And so, hopefully Taylor will work well next to Tooney. But that was just an interesting pivot for me on how that whole situation played out. And for those that are asking, I haven't heard anything on Tunsil and an extension. I keep working under the impression that it's when, not if, but you never know with Caserio. He seems to be a wild card on those kind of things, but you would kind of expect that deal to get done sooner or later, because they are getting a little short on cap space, and they are going to have a very, very large, expensive draft class that they're going to have to sign. So they're probably going to have to figure out something one way or another, whether it's a Brandin Cooks trade or Laramie Tunsil extension or both.
Go ahead. I'm just looking at that contract. So 64. Okay, so he's getting about $16 million a year, or yep. We don't know, but it's something like that.
Yeah, we'll assume that's the base value. It's hard to know with those initial reports if it's got any new kind of things.
That seems like that's a pretty reasonable deal.
It is
it not?
Yeah, $16 million for and that Jonah Williams plays left tackle over there, but he's not very good. I assume he's going to play left tackle for Cincy, but
I would think so.
Right tackle in Baltimore. So, and there's either that or maybe Jonah slides over to right and they put. I mean, even at right tackle at $16 million per year, that's still pretty well within the market. But if it's left tackle, then that's probably a pretty good deal at that rate.
That looks like a great deal.
Because I'd have to, let's see, where is that slot?
They've invested a ton into the offensive line recently in Cincinnati.
They signed the center and the guard and obviously
Collins,
and then Collins, which Collins has been kind of
he got hurt.
Yeah. So if he's $16 million, that puts him right around.
That's what he was making.
Teron Armstead at 16, under DJ Humphrey at 17. So that's 1, 2, 3, 5. So that's like the 11th height paid on an APY metric. So I think that's pretty fair, to be honest with you. And
do they just think, does Kansas City just think that Juwan Taylor is a better player than Orlando Brown? Because that does not seem like the conventional wisdom on those players, which is interesting.
Yeah, that's one thing I'd love to kind of look into in the next few days is where did that evaluation come from? Maybe they had a broken relationship from the tag and they could never get anything worked out last year. Who knows? But dropping down, having him go out on the market at 16 million per, but to bring in Taylor at 20 million per. I mean, that's a big projection on Taylor at left tackle compared to a player that you already had on the roster at a lower, what potentially could be a lower number. So, but you never know. I mean, there could be something behind the scenes that we're completely unaware of. Let's see here. So I wanted to get your take on Jimmy Garoppolo, and
yes,
I'll admit it. I was completely off base on Jimmy Garoppolo. Two or three people I talked to agents said left and right that his market is soft. There's barely any interest in him beyond one or two teams. He's not going to command more than 12, 15 million per year. And then just out of nowhere, 24 million per year, which came in pretty high compared to Houston's valuation. So I'm very shocked that they're going to give him that kind of money. And I don't know why. Unless I feel like Don Yee, his agent, just really worked over Ziegler and Vegas and worked that deal up. Because I mean, 45 million total guaranteed. I think it was like 31 or 20, or it's 22.5 at signing with another 22.5 vesting in less than 12 months. So it's almost a virtual 45 million guarantee. And that just seems crazy to me for Jimmy Garoppolo.
So it seems like we have like a legitimate mid-tier of quarterback salaries.
My middle-class quarterback class is back. I've been calling for it for like a month.
Yeah. You've got Geno Smith and Jimmy G. Yeah. I mean, I get it in terms of like, did he really have a market to get that number? Because when I look at these contracts, and this is what I talk about on the radio, I'm always looking at a couple numbers, and you do you're really like in the weeds on this, but I always look at it from my standpoint. High level is how much guaranteed money, what's the average per year, and when can you get out? Like how much guaranteed money and when can you get out of the deal is ultimately my thing. Like this could be a 1-year deal for Garoppolo in that cap number's 28 million in 2024. They could save money by cutting him. The Geno Smith deal is basically like a 1-year contract. I fell from a Texans standpoint. I'm going to connect something here. I compare the pursuit, quote unquote, of Jimmy Garoppolo to when the Texans talked to Cliff Kingsbury that one day before they ended up hiring Bobby Slowick. And I will put this cap in the category of doing favors for friends. I think the reason why they met with Cliff, because I think somebody else met with Cliff too, is even though when an NFL coach gets fired, they get the guaranteed money left on their deal, you also have what's called a duty to mitigate your damages, which basically means you still have to like look for other jobs. So he can't it would be not ideal for him or not advisable to just literally go to Thailand and just like be there for 2 years. And so you have to show that like you're interviewing, you're like looking for work. So I think the Texans did Cliff Kingsbury a favor saying, hey, we'll have you in the building, we'll chat, and you will get your money from Arizona. Similarly, there are people like Nick Caserio with relationships with Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think they ever had any intention of actually signing this guy. I think it made no sense for either side, them or him. And I'm not super high on Jimmy Garoppolo, but I also think he is comfortably one of the 32 best human beings on earth at being a quarterback. So to me, he was going to be a starter somewhere in the NFL in 2023. Why would he take a backup job in Houston? And in the alternative, why would they ever start him when they should be drafting a quarterback at number 2? And I absolutely do not want to be in a position to be drafting Will Anderson and then having Garoppolo at quarterback. So I think they did Garoppolo a favor by seeming like they were in on him, just like I think they did Cliff Kingsbury a favor by talking to him that one Friday or whatever it was about a month and a half ago.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I think the message I got, because I was like, was Houston on it? And the person I was talking to said, I don't think they ever made an offer. which it kind of aligns with what you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, how would Jimmy make sense for the Texans now? Like, could someone explain that to me?
Yeah, and there was some interest in there. I don't know at what level, or maybe they were interested. They had their number, and it seems like Caserio is sticking to his evaluations this offseason, which I perfectly get. I understand that you stick within your guardrails, and maybe Garoppolo Donye came in and said, "No, this is the number we're looking for." And Houston said, "No, that's good. Y'all go ahead. We're not going to get involved anymore in that." So maybe that's the path that it went down. Maybe Donye just played it perfectly and made it seem like Houston had more interest than they did. But the thought process was there was an outside chance that if they were to sign Garoppolo, then they would try to trade down out of 2, still get Anderson or get a very good defensive player and go that path. But I think once Garoppolo's market came in at what it ended up at 24 plus per year, I think Houston had a very quick no, we're not interested at that number.
Yeah, it just did not really make a whole lot of sense to me. And ultimately, I guess the Raiders, they go from Carr to Garoppolo. They feel like Garoppolo is a better culture fit per that Albert Breer story. And it seems like, Cap, they saved a decent amount of money.
Yeah.
Even though the Carr deal was not guaranteed past 2022. It seemed like they saved money relative to getting Garoppolo instead of Carr.
Yeah, I think if Carr's guarantees kicked in, but yeah, is Carr,
Yes.
Garoppolo's got 16.3 cap number this year, whereas Carr was going to be upwards of almost, I think, like 41 or something like that. But yeah, so it's probably a better thing for them in the long run. And Tony was asking, he heard Raiders can get out after 1 year. So yes, they can. If they get out of it before, and this is interesting too. So Las Vegas forever always did their vesting dates, which is, if you have an injury guarantee, for Mike knows this, but for people that are listening and don't know this, say you had for Jimmy Garoppolo, if he has an injury guarantee in 2024, teams can make it where it'll vest, it'll turn into a full guarantee. Well, Las Vegas always did those very, very early in the process, usually the 5th day of the waiver period, which is 5 days after the Super Bowl. Now, and I think they finally learned their lesson. I think Derek Carr was the final straw that broke that back. Jimmy Garoppolo has 3rd day league year, which is 2 days from today of vesting dates. So, and I noticed that on 3 or other 4 Las Vegas deals, they all now are new league year vesting dates. So it looks like they finally convinced Mark Davis and them to get off of that early waiver period thing. So I say that to say, they could get out of the Jimmy Garoppolo deal with like $6.5 million dead money if they did it by March 17th of 2024. So yeah, they could easily get out of it out of 1 year.
I wouldn't be shocked if they drafted a quarterback. I don't know if I'd bet on it, but it wouldn't shock me.
No, and let's get into that because I kind of wanted to pick your brain on that. I mean, Geno Smith doesn't prevent Seattle from taking a quarterback.
Nope.
Jimmy Garoppolo does not prevent Las Vegas from taking a quarterback. And now it starts, because for the longest time I felt pretty confident in saying that it felt like quarterback was going to go 1, 2, 3, yes, with Carolina, Texas, and then somebody's probably going to trade up to 3 with Arizona. I feel fairly confident in that. I'm sorry, Patrick Storm is just him and Bobby Wagner. He sends that message every week. So if somebody trades up with Arizona, maybe the Colts feel like somebody may leapfrog them into number 3, and maybe Indianapolis has to make a move. I feel like the fans are starting to catch up to what the teams have grades on Anthony Richardson, which is, I think a lot of teams have him grade a little bit maybe outside of the top 10, but that doesn't mean they won't take him out of the top 10. But I think it's very easy that not the Falcons, but the Raiders and maybe even the Titans, all these kind of teams can hop up to number 3 Same with the Seahawks, since they have pick number 5, can hop up to number 3 and get that third quarterback, whether it's Levis or Anthony Richardson. So, I know we're a month and a half away from the draft, but what's your sense of that whole situation today as it stands after we get through a little bit of free agency?
My sense is quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3 still. I don't believe the Panthers traded up for Bryce Young. I mean, you look at the betting markets, and it's changed a little bit over the course of the week. Stroud shot up to be a pretty heavy favorite by Saturday afternoon of this past weekend. Yeah. Now he's at like minus 220, minus 200. But there's still, if people actually think Bryce Young or Richardson could go number 1, now is the time, if you have disposable income, to make those bets, because you can get them a pretty good plus money. I just look around. I like Bryce Young a lot. He is my top quarterback in this class.
Me too.
Just my sense. I don't break down film or anything like that. I just watch college games. So Bryce Young's my number 1 guy. I do not believe Carolina traded up to number 1 to draft somebody who's 5'10", which is obviously his big weakness. To me, it's Stroud, or it could be Richardson. I think it's Stroud. And this whole business, like I got into a little back and forth with Sam Munson of Pro Football Focus on Twitter. Oh, because he put out this idea that the Carolina controls it. They traded up without knowing like who their guy is. And I'm just like sitting here thinking, because sometimes when I'll get so into an argument, I'll kind of zoom out and think like, okay, well, if they moved up to number 1, the number 1 overall pick, giving up the 2 2s, the extra 1, DJ Moore, and they did that without knowing who they drafted, like who else in the last 25 years in the NFL has done that? I can't recall anybody doing that. And I can only go based on like what I've observed in my lifetime of how football teams work. And this idea that Carolina moving down to number 4, I think is insane. Yeah. I think it's numerically insane. It's mathematically insane. It makes no sense at all.
That's just stoking a fire with Houston. That's complete bullshit. Yeah.
And I would love to do like some sort of like reenactment or imagination of what a phone call between Scott Fitterer and Nick Caserio would be, because as critical as I was about Caserio 30 minutes ago about free agency, I trust Caserio almost implicitly to do the brinksmanship thing, to do a deal or not do a deal. And the evidence is what he did with Deshaun Watson last year, that he set a price tag, he got his number, they got 4 teams, and they executed it perfectly. So I trust Caserio when it comes to things like this. I mean, Carolina calls and says, hey, do you want to move off the board? And I'm Nick, I'm like, you guys traded up to number 1. Like, what are you calling me for? You traded up for somebody, and they're saying, well, we know you want Bryce Young. And I'd be saying, like, I don't think you're drafting Bryce Young. I think you're drafting CJ Stroud.
He's got to be ready to call his bluff, or may not even answer the phone.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing Carolina could say that would be able to convince Caserio, and I'm speculating, of course, but there's nothing they should be able to tell him to make him move off and go, oh, that's a good point. I think I do need to move up to number 1. There's absolutely nothing. And absent the fact that Houston is in on Stroud, but I don't think they are. So,
I mean, I think part of it is, I think you have to, in order to do that, I do think at some level you'd have to be comfortable with taking 2 quarterbacks. But at the end of the day, which I think the Texans are, I haven't talked to anybody, just my sense. I think they would be, but I think the Panthers are taking CJ Stroud.
Yeah.
So I think the Texans will not be hurt by the idiocy that happened in week 18, because I think the guy they prefer is Bryce. And I think Carolina traded up for CJ Stroud, and I think the Texans are going to get away with it. Yeah. That's my overall evaluation of the situation there.
Yeah. If you got any questions, concerns, throw them up on the board. We'll get to as much as we can here in these last 10, 15 minutes.
Somebody asked about center, which I do think is a mystery.
I was going to get to that one here. Let's see here.
Let's see. So Connor McGovern, NFC version, signed. Jake Brendel, who we heard all sorts of rumors about, re-signed in San Francisco. Bradley Bozeman re-signs in Carolina. Bradbury re-signs in Minnesota. Kelsey comes back. That was obviously Philadelphia or bust. So yeah, there's not a whole, you could sign the other McGovern from the Jets, who's a useful player. Ben Jones is out there, who I guess I'd prefer over Scott Quesenberry. Posick re-signed in Cleveland. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the plan is at center.
Yeah, I think they I think they were in on Brindle. I don't think they would have been in on Bozeman. That's not a zone
Yeah, it
scheme
seems like
kind of guy.
yeah.
He's a big power gap kind of guy.
Yes.
Posick, that one would have caused me a little bit of concern just because he's coming from Bill Callahan, and
Yeah.
it seems like nobody's ever going to play as good as they do from under his stance. But Bradbury was probably one of the other ones that would have been
I wanted
interested
him
in. Yeah, would have been
and
interested
that's a
in him.
reasonable deal.
Yeah, 5.25 million per year. That one kind of threw me off, but yeah, it's gotten very, very tight very, very quickly. There's only a couple of centers in the draft, maybe 3 that would.
And again, that puts
would
you in
be
a situation where, like,
draftable in
yes,
the top 3. So do you end up? Does that, like, I assume you're going to say, does that put you in a position where you end up reaching for somebody?
yeah, or just locking yourself in. Now, thankfully, they have the 2 first-round picks, but like you take a quarterback, you take whatever best available at 12, and like does that like basically lock you into a center with your second-round pick, which could work out fine, but then I'm in a situation where I basically have to take a center with that pick, and then I got to plug him in as a rookie. I mean, I don't have to, but I'd like to plug him in to play in front of a rookie quarterback. It seems like that's, if I had to ask Caserio about one specific position and what the philosophy has been, center would be that position, because I don't really understand bringing back Quesenberry and not pursuing one of these guys.
Yeah, I think McGovern, like you said, AFC version McGovern would probably be the only one that would make sense. Ben Jones, I think I would view Ben Jones as somebody that would maybe be you sign after the draft. Kind of, if you just completely whiff in the draft and you have no other options, and make sure Ben Jones still wants to play, make sure he can still walk. He was pretty beat up last year. So, you hope they have some kind of plan out there. I don't know of any kind of trade opportunities that would be available. I haven't even tried to research any trade opportunities out there, but I would imagine it would be pretty slim picking. So I agree with you. I think that's probably one of going to be the biggest priorities once they get past this second wave of free agency, to figure out what is the plan here, because we obviously cannot run into they obviously cannot run into the season with Scott Quesenberry and Jimmy Morrissey as their top 2 guys.
Yeah, it's not a viable option. So, like, if you wanted that Bradbury contract, it seems so feasible to do.
Yeah, and he may have just wanted to stay there. I mean,
that's possible. Yes, of course.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to uproot his life. I get it.
Yeah, that part's always the tricky part. And Dalton says the Ohio State center would be a steal. So it's Luke Whippler, Joe Tippmann, and John Michael Schmitz are the top 3 consensus centers in the draft.
Yes,
they're all projected probably late 2nd, early 3rd round type draft picks. Once you get past those 3 guys, then you're really dropping down into the deeper day 3 picks, and maybe you can end up finding somebody there. It's a tough projection to get that far. So it's one of those 3 players. When you just looking at PFF big board, Whippler's ranked 46 overall, Tippmann 53, and Schmitz at 68. So they're all just kind of grouped together. It just kind of depends on which one would maybe project better in your scheme, interview, things like that. They all graded almost near identical to each other. So that's probably going to be the three consensus out there. So Corey wants to know, what's the timeline look like on a Cooks deal? I have no clue when that. I have not heard anything on when or if that's going to happen. Or I would think I just know he wants out.
Yeah, I would think the timeline would be before the draft. So next month and a half. Yeah. This seems like this is probably 95% to get done either way, and you're just hoping to get as much compensation as possible. But
yeah, they're not up against it to have to do it today or tomorrow. And
yes,
that's worth mentioning for sure. So, compensation, I've been steadfast on it that I think it's going to be a 4th or 5th rounder. Just depends on how much money Houston's willing to take on from the $18 million that's fully guaranteed via his base salary. One question I had for you, Mike, specific to Brandin Cooks, see if this makes sense in my line of thinking, is you saw Lazard and Myers both go for what, 10, $11 million. Juju Schuster-Smith, I think when almost 12.
Right around 11, I think.
Yeah, 11 to 12. So we're just going to say 11 million for the big three free agent wide receivers, 11 million per year. Does it make sense that if Cooks has a salary of 18 million, does it make sense that you take on 6 million of that salary to bring it down to 12 to be in line with what kind of the free agent market would be? Because I assume Cooks would probably be around that kind of valuation if he were just an open free agent.
Yeah, I think it's probably a fair valuation, just because of age, arguably declining explosiveness. Felt like I honestly, it felt like a soft market for receivers, period. Because I don't think Jacoby Myers is great, but like I was looking at the numbers, I'm like, man, could Jacoby Myers make like 16 million a year? Nope, not the case. Listen, I have no qualms with taking on more money if it gets me a better draft pick. That is the exact kind of trade this organization should be making all the time. If it gets me a better pick, I will take on more money. And I think your theory is fairly reasonable.
Yeah. So if they didn't adjust the contract at all, Corey, they would get, let's see here, they would end up with about 10.2 cap savings before a player placement in top 51. So roughly $10 million in cap savings, 18.5 million cash savings. That savings would drop, aligned with however much. If they took on 6 million, then there would only be a 4 million cap savings. So that would be how that would work out. Maybe it's not a very huge, it's not a real big draft for wide receivers. There's no real game changers in this draft. There's probably a lot of wide receiver 2 type players in this draft. But there's no real game changers. There's no Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase type players in this draft. So maybe that works in Houston's favor. This could drag all the way out to draft night. And
I'm mentally viewing this pick as the replacement for that idiotic pick that they lost for the, Watson $25,000 or whatever that was.
That was the NFL, and I'm nobody can convince me otherwise. That was the NFL going, we never had a chance to punish you for the Watson situation, so we're going to use this situation to do it. Because if that was it, I talked to 2 different people, who in league circles and said, "Does this make sense to you?" And they said, "No. If this were any other team, without the Watson situation entanglement, this would have never have been even made aware of. This would have been a salary cap adjustment. They would have just gotten that money taken off of their cap this year, and it would have just been a debit off of their cap, and nobody would have known any different. It would have been buried in their annual adjustment." But I'm convinced that's what the NFL did. And you're not going to convince me otherwise.
It would be relatively shocking if during COVID that no other team of the other 31 did something vaguely similar.
Yeah.
Except there was no need for Sports Illustrated to be poking around at some of those players across the league. Yeah, I agree with you 1,000%. That's a good theory.
Yeah. Oh, my favorite fan, Birdie, says I'm always right about everything. Where do rumors of not taking QB at 2 come? Where do any rumors come from, man?
I don't know.
I get messages from people that I trust, and this person who sent me this about pick number 2 and not taking a QB was spot on with Carolina trading up to number 1 about 6 hours before it happened. So I do trust that person pretty well, and that's where that was coming from, and and he said that's where. There was just some chatter across the league. I don't know at what serious level it was at. So it may have been just chatter, or it may have been nothing.
Let's look at the combination of words and actions. So up until Bobby Slowick spoke like a week ago, they had never even mentioned the name Davis Mills, Nick Caserio, nor D'Amico Ryans. They signed Case Keenum this week. I don't think they signed Case Keenum to be the starting quarterback in 2023. So if they're not planning to take a quarterback at number 2, are they planning to start a guy who was not even named by the new head coach on multiple occasions? I mean, that just seems a little weird to me.
Yeah, I don't know. They wouldn't even name a quarterback for for like 2 weeks. Kept saying
Yes.
we have a quarterback on the roster.
Yes.
Um,
Do you think that if they draft a quarterback at 2, what do you think happens to Davis Mills?
So there's kind of two sides to this. I think if I were Davis Mills, I'd be asking the team, "Hey, can you work out a trade to
Agreed.
a place where I have a better shot?" But from a team aspect and asset utilization, having Davis Mills as your QB2 or QB3 or whatever you want to
It's a
consider
good
it
deal.
at his rookie deal, third round contract for 2 more years is a huge asset to have, because it'd be different if he had no experience, but he's got
A lot of it.
a year and a half worth of experience. So if your rookie quarterback gets hurt week 3, maybe Davis Mills can bridge it over, or maybe they choose to have Case Keenum as QB2. But point is I think having Davis Mills on this roster has a lot of value from a depth perspective at your quarterback position, to where if you start out and this rookie quarterback's just on fire and you're winning 3 or 4 games early on and then he gets hurt, Davis Mills can maybe come in and bridge that gap for 2 or 3 weeks. So that would be my thinking now. But I also can understand from the other perspective where Davis Mills says, I see the writing on the wall. I'm going to be third on this depth chart no matter what. Let's try to figure out a way for me to get elsewhere. And I don't even know what kind of value he would have, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that's my sense on the business of football, that if you're his agent, if and when the Texans draft a quarterback at 2, they got Keenum as the backup, you're probably going to Caserio and saying, hey, let's look around the league and see, give me a spot where he has a better chance of playing in 2023. I agree with you.
Yeah. So Texas Range Time says, when teams restructure a contract, does the player have to agree to it? So it depends on the contract. So Houston, and a lot of teams do this, New England does not, conversely, but they will put in a paragraph in the contract that gives them automatic conversion rights. So they can just go in, and it's literally an accounting function. They're converting base salary to a signing bonus, but the player still gets paid throughout the season. He doesn't get that money up front. It's literally just an accounting adjustment of how the salary cap dollars are allocated across the salary cap. If they go in and add void years, which you see like New Orleans, Carolina, Detroit, those teams do that quite a bit. That's when the player has to agree to a new contract. And that's when they may be able to finagle, hey, well, let's do the signing bonus up front. As part of this conversion, we'll help you out and give you void years. The one team that did it a little bit tricky, and you might like this, Mike, was Washington Redskins. They had 3 contracts where inside the automatic conversion paragraph they put in, we also have the right to add up to 2 void years as part of the conversion.
Okay. So they negotiate that as part of the deal.
I was blown away when I saw that. But to answer the question, it depends on the contract. In Houston's case, more often than not, they can just do it. They give the player a piece of paper. It's a new signing bonus addendum to the contract. It's just 1 page. Sign it, blah, blah, blah. Off they go. They still get their money the same. If it's a new deal with void years, then yes, they would have to agree to it. So it just kind of depends on the situation.
I actually did not know that about the. I thought they got the money up front when they did the conversion, but no, it's just like it's pure accounting.
It's pure accounting. Yep. I'll remind me, and I'll send you a contract, and you can. Well,
yeah, I'm intrigued.
You can look at that Deshaun Watson contract if you still have it.
I still got it. Don't worry.
The Houston one, I think it's in there. Let's see here. Gotta pray Ryan Kelly gets cut.
See, this is the thing. Like, Indianapolis is not in a different spot than you are. They want a good center too. So what does it say if they're cutting Ryan Kelly as far as what he might have left?
Yeah, I know Indy was a little tied up against salary cap, and he's due over $10 million in compensation this year between base salary but they're still they're actually better than I thought they were at $25 million in space. Oh, that's right. They let go of Matt Ryan and traded Gilmore. So that's where that space came from. So I'd be shocked at this point. Like Mike says, it just creates a new hole for them to fill with no options to backfill it with. So at this point, I think Ryan Kelly maybe there to say. Can you guys talk about your sources about our pick at number? No. I can't really say anything beyond with Beyonce. I mean, I would talk to people and you hear things and you just try to determine who's got better information and whatnot. I mean, but there's tea leaves out there. You try to look at all the information as best you can, and you'll hear just today where Lance Zierlein and John Granato were talking this morning. They put up on the Sports Map YouTube channel, that it's not really set in stone what they'll do at 2, and we know Lance is pretty well plugged in. So, I mean, it's going to change from week to week, Josh. But I mean, it's going to. I mean, I feel pretty confident after the fact that they didn't sign Jimmy Garoppolo or any other big name veteran quarterback that they got to be going number 2 at quarterback.
Yeah, that's been my sense the whole time. I think it was a mistake to win it in week 18, but I think that they have had 2 quarterbacks they like the whole time, which is why I guess that decision the attempt will not cripple them. And I think they're going to end up with the guy that they prefer in Bryce Young. That has been my overall sense since probably late December.
Yeah. Biggest need. It's still a lot of needs. I mean, they still need, like we said, QB1, center. They need a speed wide receiver. That's, and it makes me wonder if, I guess, assume Brandin Cooks gets traded. Does Nico slide over to the X receiver spot? And you have Robert Woods, who's the Z, and does a little more run blocking underneath work. But under that scenario, and kind of depends on if John Mechie makes it back or not. You really don't have that burner on this roster. So I think that's another spot. RB2, Mike Boone and
by the way,
go ahead.
See, this is what I find hilarious about the way that the Texans run things. Cap, can you imagine the conversation that's happening at NRG Stadium this Monday, 2 days ago? So where they're like, guys, we need to sign Mike Boone today. That's what fascinates me.
There's always one. I mean, Eric Murray was that one too. Everybody was like, who the hell is this guy? Why is he getting a wave one? I mean, luckily it was a low level deal, but why is he getting signed, like you said, 2 hours into the tampering period?
Yes. Yeah. We got to make sure to lock up Mike Boone on day 1 of NFL free agency.
Yes.
That's what is mystifying to me.
Yes.
I still think tight end is a need.
Yeah. Tight end, RB2, linebacker.
RB2 is a need.
Yeah. Linebacker's going to be a need, even if they sign Perriman and sweep out Kirksey. D-line I had on here as a need, and I think you're still going to have some kind of need there on the edge, at least. Maybe they've kind of shored up the interior a little bit.
Yeah, the interior could be actually pretty decent here, but the edge they need help.
And then they
generally
help everywhere. But Tavierre Thomas re-signed I can chop that one off the list.
I mean, they have passable NFL players at a lot of these defensive spots, but it's just hard to field a good unit in the NFL unless you have standout players, which is what they don't have at the moment. I mean, they could in Stingley and Petrie, but we shall see.
Yeah. So Beige from good to see you, bud. So do we see any more? I would say they're probably pretty close to done. Maybe Perriman is their next decent free agent signing, but if they sign him and they let go of Kirksey, that still puts the team at 65 players under contract. On a 90-man roster, 10 draft picks puts them at 75. Undrafted class of 10 players puts them at 85. So, maybe they sign 1 or 2 more players, but I really don't see it being much bigger than what they're at now.
That makes sense.
Jake Oz get traded before the season. Yeah, that's what we talked about. It probably gets traded before the draft.
I'd say 95%.
Yeah. Boy, these comments got away from me. Y'all threw them up here quickly. Let's see here. And one other, someone's going to check my talking points one more time. Oh, Jalen Carter.
Yes.
That's wild. I mean, I get that he's dealing with.
What are his agents doing?
I
What
don't
is
know, but
going on there?
he showed up at his pro day just out of shape, 9 pounds overweight, couldn't finish, didn't want to do any of the testing drills. And then the drills he did run, he couldn't even finish because he was out of shape and out of breath. And I mean, and I get it, man. The mental stuff that he's dealing with right now is probably a huge piece of that. But that is I mean, at first, I had tweeted it at the time when the first batch of news came out. I was like, is this going to be a Lyle Collins type slide, or is this going to be a Laramie Tunsil slide? And at first I thought it was going to be, and I still think it's probably a Laramie Tunsil. I don't think he falls, way out of, but now it's definitely very conceivable that he gets outside of the top 10 and could be
He could be there at 12.
At 12, and begs the question: is that somebody Houston should be interested in at 12? I mean, his talent is just off the charts. I just don't know if the team would be willing to bring that in.
Somebody tweeted today that decision would be made at the ownership, head coach, and GM level, which I feel like it would be anyway in the first round. And like with this situation, like that would be I mean, like what is Cal McNair going to say about drafting Jalen Carter at 12? Like, with all due respect, that's a Nick and D'Amico decision to me. And I strongly consider it. People owe Todd McShay an apology. Like, NFL Twitter loves to dump on guys when it's like, hey, anonymous sources say that this guy's got bad character, which I know is a pretty subjective thing. But like, while most of the NFL players I've dealt with seem like largely pretty decent human beings and good guys, like there are guys in the league who are not good human beings, or there are guys who might be good human beings who are lazy, and there are guys who are in the NFL who don't work hard. And nobody's going to go on the record and ever tell you that because they're under contract to NFL teams. So people like in McShay's position, or I think Orlovsky with Fields a couple of years ago, you have to be judicious when you report stuff like that and make sure that the information is good and people aren't just trying to manipulate the draft with that. But Todd McShay a month and a half ago talked about the rumors about Jalen Carter, and NFL Twitter just annihilated him, which they love to do, and nobody's apologized to him, and Todd McShay was right. He was right about that. Yeah,
I'm with you there on that one. And that would be a fact. I don't have a preference, whether they took him or not taking him. I'd leave that, that's the team's decision, but that's going to be a fascinating situation to monitor for the next 3 weeks. I mean, his interviews are going to be critical at this point.
Yes, absolutely.
To where he gets drafted. So Rose asks, is there any other prospects in the 12 pick range that you're not drinking the Kool-Aid hype? Not a fan of Van Ness personally. So, I mean, I'm a big, at this point, kind of trading back from 12. Definitely not on the Quentin Johnston train. I don't really want him at all. I would rather get someone like a Jalen Hyatt at the back of the first round, top of the second round, or a Njigba. But I mean, it's still so early in the draft, and things are going to shift so much. I really don't. I mean, but I still would love to have an edge guy, regardless if it's Van Ness or somebody else. I think that's going to be one of the biggest needs for this team is edge. And, hopefully the scenario for me would be if you could trade back from 12 and get back into that 18 to 25 range where, Nolan Smith is at, that type of player. And
that would be exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would bank on that. I like that kind of athletic profile, like a guy who's a hell of an athlete, was one of the best players on an elite team. I know he didn't play a whole lot this past season, but you see the athleticism at the combine. Yeah. I'm curious, Cap. So you want to trade down from 12. Is your goal to get a third round pick by doing that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think second and third round pick is where a team can really create a massive amount of value on their roster if they can hit on a second or third round pick. So if you're able to get another quote unquote dart at the dartboard with another third round pick by moving back 6 or 7 spots, and I am all for it. I mean, that gives you another shot at one of the centers, something like that, definitely all for that kind of move. But if your guy's there at 12, don't trade back. Fine with either way.
Yes.
Let's see what else on here. You doing okay on time, Mike?
I am. Yes.
Okay. Trying to see what else. There's a lot of comments Gonna try to keep my Jerry Jude trade alive from truth. Yeah, there was talk about there was talk, I think Albright mentioned it a few times that there was talk about moving one of the wide receivers out of there, but whether it was Cortland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy, seems like Tim Patrick is the one guy they want to keep. I just can't get a gauge on what kind of value Jerry Jeudy would command in a trade.
Yeah, I mean, are you giving up a second-round pick for him? Like the whole thing's kind of confusing. I've always been a big fan of his talent. I've always felt like he was a very talented guy. Are you willing to get, if you're doing this, then you're trading for him to be a part of your future, not just a 1 or 2 year rental idea, but like, hey, this is somebody who you're going to bring in for your quarterback, and he's super young, turns 24 in a month. Yep. I would think about it. Yeah, I'd think about it.
Yeah, he was 15th overall, had 972 yards receiving last year on 67 receptions. Ooh, that's a big average, 14 and a half per catch.
With a guy who was playing poorly at quarterback.
Yeah. And like you say, he's only 24, had no TC valuation of 10 million. So, and you'd have to make the 5th year option decision. By May 3rd, which I think if you traded for him, you're obviously going to make that option right off the bat. And he's contract extension eligible as well. Maybe you could build it all in as part of that trade. But I'm with Truth. I wouldn't have any problem taking on that deal if you could get. Would you give pick 33 for him? That's a tough one.
I would think about it.
Yeah. Is Derek Rivers? Why is that dude on this roster? I'm going to go full Cody Stoops. Why is he on this roster? He was Jack Easterby's boy. From my understanding, that's the only reason why he was on this roster to begin with, and then he got re-signed again. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at his Pro Football Focus grade and see.
Well, he didn't play last year at all.
Oh yeah, he did not play. That's right.
He was on IR all year. So
I forget. Yeah, I forget these things. Derek Rivers.
I mean, yeah. He was on a minimum contract. He was on a split salary last year. What does Noah Brown do well?
Block.
Yes.
Be tall.
Yes. He's definitely not a burner. No. 4.64 40-yard dash at his combine, 4.56 at pro day. I don't think he worked out at the combine. I don't think he was invited. So yeah, no, he's not a burner. He's a big, like Mike said, big guy who's a willing blocker.
Yes, which is what you need in the San Francisco style offense.
Yes. You got 2 of them already.
Yes.
Would you take Bijan at 12? No.
I would not. Landry and I discussed this a lot on Sunday.
That's biased.
Yeah, I mean, you can see the appeal for it in that Bijan Robinson is somebody who, like, if this was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you're talking about a top 5 pick.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah, and he's somebody who you feel like it's harder to build a good offense and a good defense because you typically need a good quarterback to have a good offense, and that's hard to get. But Bijan Robinson is instant offense from the standpoint of in the rushing game, in the receiving game. The guy's a really willing and really good pass blocker as well, so you can have him in there on all 3 downs. I just think that when you're in the roster position the Texans are in, I mentioned excess roster value like an hour ago. I lean towards like using much lesser assets at running back at this stage. That's what I would lean towards.
Yeah, if this team was a 9-10 win team sitting in that 15 to 18 draft spot with a quarterback under roster, then that's a beautiful time to take Bijan Robinson. But I just don't think this roster is in that place. I kind of equate it to like the Giants taking Barkley. They just weren't in that roster's, in that direction to take that. And trust, I agree with you. I would love to have him. I think he would be a beautiful 1A, 1B with Pierce.
Yes.
And somebody who can play wide receiver as well. Heard Denver wants a first, right? That's for Jeudy. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, if you were them, that's what you'd want. Yes, yeah. Especially because they don't have one, right?
Yeah, and you utilized our first round pick to draft him, and he's put up very good numbers in his first 3 years. He was injured the second year, but I mean he's put up 800 yards his first year, 500 yards the second year on half the season, and 900 yards this past season. So yeah, he's put up the numbers and had to deal with not the best quarterbacks in his first 3 years. So, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. They would want a first, and they probably could get a first. Maybe it might be a future first. Maybe it's not the first this year, but yeah, and like Mike said, they're short on draft picks over there in Denver, so they would love to do that. So, and they committed a lot of money this offseason already. They have that Walmart family is really doling out.
They have
the money over
on
there.
the O-line, yeah.
Yep. They've where's my free agent spending at?
But the one thing that they might regret is that McGlinchey deal is the one that right now looks like a big overpay this early in the process.
Yeah. So
that
total
like
total guarantees, they're at $131 million in total guarantees handed out over 7 contracts, which is numero uno among all 32 teams. So yeah, they're doling out the money. That Mike McGlinchey deal was very strong, and he's a smaller guy. I don't know. I'd be interested to see if that one comes back and bites him in the butt. But
that's the
you
one
can definitely tell Sean Payton's getting his hands all over that roster because that's what they did in New Orleans. They just
for sure
did everything for the offensive line and the defensive line. They built out of the trenches. He's a Bill Parcells disciple, so that makes perfect sense. I think that's about all I had, Mike.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. We will see what happens in the next couple days.
Yeah, we'll have to get you back on maybe post-draft or right before the draft. Get us another MIke Meltser reaction. But, I mean,
indeed,
free agency's not over. It's going to slow down. This was a crappy free agency. I mean, that by past free agency classes, this was just overall across the league. This is one of the worst free agency groups we've had in a while. So that's, it is just part of the situation. And, to answer one of the questions again before, I think you might see a signing or two more out of Houston, but for the most part, they're more or less done. One piece I am interested to see with the Shaq Mason trade, there was talk about a new contract being put in place for Mason, maybe to bring down his cap number a little bit this year. Be kind of curious to see what kind of extension they do for him. He's 28 years old, had very, very good PFF grades, good metrics coming up until this his 1 year in Tampa. I don't know if it was a system issue, playing, they had a lot of injuries on that offensive line in Tampa. So, he had a rough year. So you hope that you get the New England performance that he had, but I'm very interested to see how that happens. Interested to see what happens with Christian Kirksey, if he ends up staying on this roster or not. And then, as always, we'll be standing by for Cooks trade and Laramie Tunsil extension if those things are to happen. So a lot to still happen for Houston. Then, of course, the draft coming up. And, appreciate everybody watching in, listening tonight. Appreciate all the comments. Love interacting with everybody. If you're new to the show, like I said, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. It really helps out the show. And Mike, you got anything else, bud?
Not really. Just, plugging along day by day. So
yeah,
I've enjoyed it though, Cap.
Take a look at that Watson contract.
I will. I'm
intrigued.
That
automatic conversion rights are believe it in there. But if it's not in there, let me know. I'll find a contract and send it to you.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that's it for us, guys. And with that, we will shut it down. We will be back next Wednesday. One of my favorite people in the whole world, Jason Fitzgerald, who owns overthecap.com, is slated to join us. So I'm really excited to talk to him. So we'll be back next Wednesday. Everybody have a good evening. With that, we will shut it down. Peace.